All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to What's the Big Idea? I'm here with Mastin Kipp. Mastin, welcome to the show.
Andrew, great to be here. Excited to dive in.
Very much so, man. Well, I always like to start these podcasts with a little bit of appreciation. I'm fortunate that I really only do this podcast when I intersect with someone who is doing something in the world that I really admire and respect. And I was familiar with your work from many, many years ago, dating back to the Daily Love. And when I reconnected with you recently through some mutual friends, Emmy and Bea, I noticed this transformation, at least my experience of it, of where you were leading from, which was, I would contextualize it as more traditional personal growth and Tony Robbins and full spectrum. And when I uh, dove into your content on Instagram, it was so much more about the somatics and the nervous system and feeling and calm and rest and safety. And it just felt so grounding. And I've always been a fan of your work, but I was so curious to learn more about what inspired. And even if that kind of evolution that I witnessed was actually happening for you, and if you felt there was a transformation in your work. But yeah, so I'm just really grateful to have you on the podcast and to dive deep and to hear more about kind of what landed you there. And then, I asked you what's the one thing you'd really want to share about, and you said how to create a nervous system that can hold your next level. So thank you so much for taking the time, brother. Thanks for all the work you've been putting out for the past many, many years, and really excited to see where you're at today and what's most alive.
Andrew, well, thank you for that. It means a lot. And beautiful noticing and reflection. I think being the person that's doing the growing over here and just kind of moving forward, it's beautiful to hear that reflection. So thank you for that. And I'm really happy to dive in and get into all the nitty gritty of what you just said, because you said a lot.
Well, I'd be curious to hear, because so much of our conversation today, I think, is going to revolve around the nervous system and what that is and why it matters and how to work with it intentionally. But I'm really curious for you, what was the moment in your career in the realm of personal transformation, growth, leadership, where your attention really started to shift or focus on the nervous system, somatics, and the emotions as such a central part of sustainable growth?
Totally. Well, great question. So before I do the work I do now, I was a manager in the music business working with rock stars, like selling out stadiums. Like that was what I did. And what I loved about that process was being able to take something and create this like beautiful thing, whether it's a Linkin Park or a Limp Bizkit or a Korn or Backstreet Boys, like lots of different bands we worked with a long time ago. And to see like Linkin Park go from zero to what it became was just incredible. And so when I attended my first Tony Robbins event in like 2010, I remember being like, this is like a rock show, but I'm getting better. Like there's no alcohol, there's no drugs. Like, what is this? And Tony was the first person that really highlighted how important it is to condition the nervous system. And at that point, it was a theoretical concept for me. Like, okay, yeah, of course we have a nervous system and we have a body. It was very much like theoretical. It was, and I believed him, but my father has a background in biology. He's an editor of peer-reviewed journal. So he's like steeped in science. So whenever someone makes a claim, part of me goes, wait, is this true? And so, Tony sort of ushered me into personal development. And I thought this was way cooler than managing bands because it's like, unleashing human potential is the same thing, whether it's doing it for bands or for human beings. And so I wanted to get more into that. And then as I got into the world of what you kind of said earlier, kind of classic personal development, which by the way, Tony is an incredible pioneer of, and he has added so much value and created so much goodness and generosity in this world and really helped us clarify so many things about what it takes to achieve. As I started to achieve and do more from that place, and also in the music business, seeing people who would achieve massive levels of success but not be able to enjoy it, or they would eventually self-sabotage in some way, I wanted to understand the mechanism of action for why that was the case. And so my father, sort of biological brain context, scientist brain took over. And I wanted to understand what's happening when we're in a peak state, what's happening when we're checking out or when we're self-sabotaging. And that led me into the world of polyvagal theory and Dr. Stephen Porges, who authored polyvagal theory back in the 90s. And as soon as he started describing how the vagus nerve works, how these different states of the nervous system work, I was like, this creates a scientific lens through which I can understand both wounds and conditioning for the next level. And polyvagal theory for me was when I discovered polyvagal theory, that was the moment where it went from theoretical to a mechanism of action to something that we could actually understand. And if we go all the way back, by the way, to like the 1800s with William James, who's kind of the father of modern psychology at Harvard, when he wrote, his work, he still believed psychology was a soft science because we could not measure the mechanisms. And today we are getting really good at being able to measure the mechanisms of action. But I think polyvagal theory for me was that reading that and getting that and distilling it was like, this is something I can get my teeth into. That's not just a claim. It's not just something I'm observing, but like something I can start to quantify. And
Yeah.
that was the beginning of the transformation that you were talking about earlier.
One of the things that I love to do on this podcast is when people use these terms that we might have a high level understanding of, but to take it a little bit deeper. And so you mentioned that your father is a medical practitioner, like he writes for a peer reviewed journal. And so I'm curious if you were to give us a high level explanation of what polyvagal theory discovered and posits, like what is that theory and what does it help us to understand about how the nervous system functions?
Yeah, sure. So when I get excited, I talk fast. So my father was a biologist, PhD, and he edited a peer-reviewed journal in the context of biology. So he was always vetting things. And the purpose of science is not to prove things right; it's actually to prove things wrong. Because if you can prove a theory wrong, it's not a theory. Like if you can prove the theory of relativity wrong, that would be a big deal, right? So basically, that's the goal of science. So in the context of polyvagal theory, what is it? So polyvagal theory is this concept that Dr. Stephen Porges originated. Now, by the way, he is a scientist who basically codified HRV as a biometric. So all this HRV, Whoop, and all these biometrics that we're seeing now with heart rate variability, vagal tone, Dr. Porges is the guy who codified that as a actual thing biomarker that we can actually measure. And so he has been studying the vagus nerve and the human nervous system his entire career. And what he basically helped us realize is that our nervous system has evolved at a specific pace and it's measured. And there's three different branches of the nervous system. We used to think there were two branches, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Now we know there's three branches, and there's a sort of a hierarchy of how things present in the body. And the other thing that polyvagal theory helps us realize is that everything that we do behaviorally is an adaptation to experience. And so what that starts to mean is that whether we think about trauma or we think about success, everything you're doing is an adaptation to the environment that you're in and what you're actually conditioning. And you can condition depression, you can condition joy. States become traits over time. And polyvagal theory helps us understand the how of it in the nervous system, basically. And if you take any modality that people love, whether it's neurolinguistic programming, internal family systems, somatic experiencing, parts work, etc., all of them can be explained through this theory because what polyvagal theory helps us recognize is we experience life through our nervous system. So everything that happens in our body, good, bad, ugly, a child crying, a child being joyful, loving moment with your partner, a hard moment with your partner, everything is happening and you're experiencing it through the nervous system. So it helps us recognize how the nervous system works, what order it works in, and what do we have to do in order to get into a better state over time, basically. And it explains mental illness. It also explains high performance. Now, it's mostly been contextualized so far in the context of trauma. But for me, what's most exciting is potential. How can we step into something? How can we use this information to build and to grow? And yes, heal, but why do we heal? So we can grow, right? So that ultimately is what my work is about, is trying to figure out how to apply all this so that we can sort of reach potential at scale.
Yeah, you have this great quote. It says that change doesn't occur until the nervous system feels safe for that change to occur, right? And I'm paraphrasing there a little bit. But could you say a little more about if change doesn't happen, and if we're talking about performance, which might align nicely with our audience a little bit more, and let's start there, which is, so if we're focused on performance, if we're focused on behavior change, habit formation, where do we start if we're trying to make it safe for our nervous system to create the type of changes that we seek as leaders, as husbands, wives, you name it.
So make it really specific. Okay. So if you think about anything in your life that you struggle with, everyone has something they're dissatisfied with. I don't care who you are. You could have $1 billion. You could have all the companies. You could have all the relationships. You could have the best health. You could be, your telomere super long. Everybody has one area at least of their life where they're dissatisfied. And if you look at that area where you're dissatisfied, you'll probably notice that there are similar patterns that have crept in where you find yourself in the same situation consistently. Maybe not exactly, but the theme is consistent. And so what that is it's called repetition compulsion. And Freud identified this in his work. And basically, what that means is that when we experience something that's overwhelming or hard, or when we experience neglect, or when we experience something that we wanted but we didn't get it, something that overwhelmed the system or harmed the system, our drive is to master that experience. And so many entrepreneurs start as, in a way, kind of a trauma response to master something they didn't get when they were younger. And the people who figure that out, either intentionally or unintentionally, can enjoy the spoils of their efforts. The people who don't figure that out just continue to have this repetition compulsion with more and more money, which is basically hell on earth, and you burn out and stuff like that. And so if you recognize that what you're trying to shift is actually a repeating pattern that your nervous system is trying to master because it's something that you didn't get previously, it gives you a different context for what's presenting right now, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's in a business. The pattern of self sabotage, the pattern of dissatisfaction, the pattern of not quite getting there, the pattern of having it, but not quite this thing, we can start to trace it back to something in your history and start to recognize you're trying to get this specific nutritional element that you never got before. And when you recognize that, it contextualizes relationships, business, and life in a very different way because now I'm playing to my strengths and I'm recognizing, oh, my system's trying to master something that it never got, is trying to get something that it never got. And when that becomes conscious, life opens up in beautiful ways.
Yeah. I remember in one of the first books I ever read on neurolinguistic programming, the first line was associated more towards our thoughts. But I immediately, as I was studying somatics pretty deeply at the time, I associated it with the emotions. And it said, there's no enemy in the mind. And there's just this idea that any thought you have fundamentally is trying to support you in some way. And so if you can then try to look at it through that lens of what is this trying to do for me? What information is it trying to offer me? So what is it trying to protect me from? And so as you're kind of relaying it through the same lens, right, about the emotion. So how do you start to get curious in that way? How do you connect with these past traumas, emotions that they're correlated with and start to work with them when you start to understand that the adaptive kind of reason for them existing in the first reason? Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So I'm gonna answer your question sideways. Okay. All
Let
right.
it rip.
Okay. So I'm gonna do a sports analogy. Apologies, but it just is what it is. Okay. Coaches, we're coaches, and sometimes coaches do sports analogies. Okay. So
So what was your sport growing up?
baseball for sure.
Okay,
For
cool.
sure. So if you think about a pitcher who might be wanting to win the World Series, right? Okay. So sometimes they get injured. They have to get a surgery called Tommy John surgery. And it's a surgery for their arm where they have to be out for a season, but they can come back stronger. So if you think about that, a surgery, cutting open the body, that's a trauma. Okay. And you would never expect someone who's had surgery or just been cut open to get right back on the field and start to play. Right. However, if you think about it, there's a process of identifying the wound, recognizing that something has to happen. Then there's going to be intentional trauma in this case. Then there's going to be a recovery process. And then eventually I'm going to get back on the field. So if you think about the idea of creating a wound on purpose in a context of, say, I'm doing this so I can win the World Series, that's a completely different context than, wait a minute, I'm just here having surgery because why? And so what happens is when we think about identifying traumas or doing trauma work or somatic work, if we're just doing somatic work, I think that's a little dangerous because, like, let me go contact my inner child and understand how it's burdened and let me unburden it. Let me go contact this, traumatic stress that's stored in my body and release it. without a context, it's a little strange, right? Because it's like, why am I doing that? And we can actually get stuck in too much healing. And I know people who need to stop healing. It's like some people stop healing. That's the answer for your next level. Okay. Because that can be a process of self sabotage also. If you recognize that we want to do the somatic work in a context, then it changes everything. So if my goal, for example, is to get back into the game to win the World Series, if my goal is to get back into the game to become a better father, if my goal is to get back into the game to become a better husband or wife or leader, that contextualizes my journey in a different way than like, let me just feel these feelings and do this trauma work and stuff like that. Because the only reason we would ever want to talk about trauma or the past is to make the future better. Other than that, there's really no purpose to it. And it's actually a process that stops you from growth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I definitely want to double click and go a bit deeper there so people understand the distinction. So, if you talk about like what is healing, and then what would you what contextualizes what you want people to do instead
Sure.
is
Yeah. So, I remember when I went to my first psychiatrist and I was like, I have a hard time paying attention. I was like coming off of cocaine and I was telling him all these things. And he's like, I think you have ADHD. And I was like, oh, what's that? And then he prescribed me Adderall. And I was like, this feels just like cocaine. This is, oh, okay. I'm self medicating. Okay, whatever. Like, interesting. Okay. This is legal, cheaper. Okay, great. Fantastic. Amazing. Right? Great. Like, okay.
thanks, doc.
Right. But what he didn't say to me was, why do you have it in the first place? And also, like, what's your kind of goal in life, right? It was just kind of like this like transaction of like, oh, you have the symptom cluster and you need this medication. And for a while it supported me, but when I was on Adderall, which is the medication they gave me, there was like these spikes, ups and downs. And eventually I had to go off of it because I couldn't stand that process. I didn't want to be like spiked and then low and spiked and then low. Eventually I went back to the Amen clinics, got brain scanned. They really figured out I truly had ADD plus traumatic brain injuries. And they put me on Adderall XR, which is extended release. But it was contextualized for me to help me build a business, to help me be better in relationship and stuff like that. And so when we think about what is healing, healing is not a transaction where you go to someone and you say, I have a symptom, take something. That's not healing. Okay. Maybe if you have strep throat, okay, like acute illness, right? But when we think about healing, maybe mental illness or healing a trauma response or healing a relationship, that's a chronic problem. You cannot fix a chronic problem with like a pill. That's just the bottom line, right? And so healing is actually creating an experience of something you never got before. So I think of healing to people, trauma is a wound, but healing, here's an analogy, okay? If I'm dehydrated, there's something I'm not getting. I'm not getting water. I'm not getting electrolytes. That's going to cause all kinds of secondary wounds in my system, eventually death, right? But what I actually need is I need water and electrolytes. Okay. And so healing is the identification of what is the thing I didn't get and can I please give it to myself and probably also others, right? That's ultimately kind of what healing is. So if you look at all the healing modalities, internal family systems, somatic experiencing, somatic therapies, basically we're going and we're trying to discover what happened to you and to release or resolve the energy of what happened to you. And then ideally to give you what you never got. And that's kind of the goal. A lot of people, they get stuck in, but when I was 3, I was dehydrated. I was dehydrated because my mother was dehydrated. My father was dehydrated. They were dehydrated. We lived in the desert and context, 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 context. At some point, drink water with electrolytes, right? So each person has that thing that they need and it's usually pretty simple, but we all need something. So I think of healing as a restoration of something that wasn't there in the first place. There's a malnourishment of the emotion or the soul or the spirit, and we want to nourish it. We want to give it what it needs, not just hey, you have a symptom, take a pill. Now, that could be part of the process. I'm very into assisted therapies that are assisted, whether it's Ozempic assisted weight loss,
Yeah.
ketamine assisted therapy, MDMA assisted therapy, whatever it might be, right? But the goal of those things is to help us give ourselves what we needed and never got, basically. So that's ultimately what healing is. And what that does is when you give yourself what you never got, that now produces a state where you can now start to create from a different place. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I mean, let's like make it real for people who are listening to this, which is how would someone become aware of an area in their life where perhaps they are living through patterned, like trauma patterned experience that is limiting their understanding of what's possible for themselves or their life? Like, what would be one of the first things that you would invite someone to do to identify where they may be living out or kind of suppressed by one of these patterns, and they could actually start to explore what that root might be?
Well, it's the area where you're most dissatisfied, most stuck, most frustrated. Wherever you complain the most. Wherever you complain the most, wherever you're upset the most, whatever behavior or thing that's happening that's holding you back, that's where you start. And what we do is we go, okay, here's the behavior. So whatever it might be. So I had a client and her behavior was she wanted to stop eating chocolate at night or whatever. So we said, okay, so that's the behavior. And then it's like, okay, when you're doing that behavior, what do you tell yourself? Because there's something running in the background. And her story was deserve it. And I said, okay, so when you tell yourself you deserve it, what are you feeling in your body? And the answer was stress. Then it was like, okay, so what do you have to believe about life to feel this stress? The answer is I'm not supported. And when was the first time you felt unsupported? Young, when she was very young, right? And then she needed a very specific thing to feel supported, right? And so that's the work that we basically do is we help people kind of go through that process, understand like here's the behavior, I don't like. Here's what I'm telling myself when that happens. Here's the emotional state that's creating that. Here's the kind of belief or context or neural assumption, unconscious assumption that my body's. There's some reference or experience that I had that caused me to believe that or feel that way, basically. And then when we look at that experience, we look at that experience, and say, where were what was missing from in this point? And for some people, it's very basic. It's a hug. It's I'm proud of you. It's I love you. It's you're right. It's oh my god, I got your back. Like it's very basic. And when you start to give that to yourself, and then recruit the people in your life to give that to you, also, it recontextualizes your behavior, and you start to really have a lot more harmony in your life, right? So that basically that's a retrieval and release process that we go through, and then from that place, once that's understood, then we can get generative and go, okay, what do we want to create in life? Because if I create from a deficit, I'm just going to continue to repeat the pattern.
Yeah. Can we bring this into the realm of entrepreneurship? Because something that I see, and I'm sure that you probably have as well. You talked about even your early journey where things kind of blew up for you pretty quick. Like, how old were you when you put out your first book and you were on Oprah's list and everything? I'm curious because you were pretty young, right?
See, early 30s.
Early 30s. Well, I have this frame that when I look at entrepreneurs, it's like this idea that there's two sources of fuel, the dirty fuel and the clean fuel. Dirty fuel, scarcity, lack, trying to prove a point, all these other things. Clean fuel, purpose, contribution, customer ROI, all these other things. And so I would look at, for entrepreneurs or business owners, executives who feel as though they are driving to achieve or create because they're not enough fundamentally, which I find is like kind of one of the quintessential shame stories that so many hold. Like, how would you invite someone to address use that like that type of scarcity based motivation as it relates to business and work?
Yeah, well, we all share it. I mean, entrepreneurs are some of the most traumatized people out there, but we just deal with it differently. Like entrepreneurs are like traumatized people with agency, basically. Like we know how to make stuff happen, basically. And so I think that ultimately, people are not going to look at things until their life gets bad enough to where they have to look at it. I mean, the thing about entrepreneurship is our solution is I have a vision. I'm going to make it real. I'm going to create a reality distortion field. I'm going to make the world bend to this vision and change the world. Right. So it's like, that's kind of beautiful. Except when you're running unconscious patterns, you burn out. And I've had dear friends like kill themselves and all kinds of stuff in business, which is really sad. And so there has to be a moment of awakening where someone says, I don't want to do it this way anymore, right? There has to be that moment. And at that point, then there's an opening to start to have the conversation. But basically, this repetition compulsion I spoke about earlier that Freud identified, if you've ever been in the same relationship in different shoes, right? Different person, same context, same pattern, that's because something in you is trying to complete itself. We can also have repetition compulsion in business. where we're trying to get the love from our father or mother, the connection, the appreciation, the acceptance, the enoughness, whatever it might be. And that's a redemptive path where I'm trying to redeem a wound. And by the way, really beautiful things can happen with people who are operating from that level of consciousness and for the world. The problem, though, is it destroys the individual because you're running on fumes eventually and you burn out and you tag out and you get really exhausted, right? And so people who have longevity as entrepreneurs, who don't burn out, who don't kill themselves, who don't tap out, who don't, boom bust, either consciously or subconsciously have been able to work through what you just said, which is how is this wound driving me? And how can I shift it from dirty fuel to clean fuel? Those are the people who have the longevity in the space. And that's why you see some people come and go. I see it happen in the coaching space all the time. Here today, gone tomorrow, coaches, right? I see it happen with businesses all the time. And then some people just have such a strong dissociative power that they're able to go very high and scale very big, but they're ultimately not fulfilled. And the poster child for this, by the way, is Elon Musk. Okay. I have such a regard for what he's built, but he has publicly stated that doing the work around his father's abuse has no value, which tells me he fundamentally does not understand the first principles of the nervous system, which is sad because he understands the first principles of physics, and the first principles of the nervous system are an emergent property of the first principles of physics. So there should be a correlation there, but there's so much drive to leave the planet because what's happening inside someone like Elon, yes, he's contribution focused, but he's really trying to outpace something from his childhood. And my wish, my hope, my prayer, someone somewhere somehow is able to help him resolve the father wound that he has not yet resolved. It's getting acted out in more and more greater and greater ways. And because he has access to things like resources and things like that, he's doing a very good job reinforcing his nervous system he's been public about his ketamine use and stuff like that. But it's helping him scale, but from a dissociated place, right? And what we want is a more of an integrated entrepreneur. And I think the true, everyone talks about 10xing and all this, a scalability and stuff like that. I think the true scalable entrepreneurs have not quite been cooked yet or emerged yet because the ones who are building through force of will, who are building through dissociative trauma responses at scale, at some point are going to hit capacity because that's what happens within the system. Entropy will take over at some point. The people who have done the inner work are the ones who are truly going to have the true moonshots because they'll have it integrated in their spirit, in their nervous system, and that will become integrated in their culture as well, right? And people
Well,
will be attracted to that. Does that make
yeah.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you said it a little ways back. You used the word, I think, that he's created success, but perhaps without true fulfillment, right? That there's never enough. There's that father wound. And I think that one of the things I think is so important for this conversation is to point out who are the people who are creating outsized success and impact while also holding relational wholeness and nervous system regulation, because it's so easy to look at Elon Musk through the lens of contribution and achievement and say, of course, he is the most prolific creator of our time, I would say. And also his unresolved trauma with his father is very well documented in the new Isaacson biography and everything else. And so who comes to mind to you as some of those people who represent that type of balance, but also outsized success and contribution in the world?
I, th- I think I think those stories are being written right now. Uh, Emmett Shear comes to mind, who founded Twitch. Tim Chang comes to mind, who you might know. I mean, there's a lot of people who are sort of emerging with this higher level of consciousness. I do believe Tony is operating from that level of consciousness. Tony Robbins, I think he's operating from that level of consciousness big time. Yeah, and Emmy and Big for sure. I mean, there are definitely people who are operating from that place, but I think this is a new. I think what has to happen, and what's happening right now with AI, and ultimately what heals trauma, is there has to be a consciousness shift. There has to be a different level of awareness. And what does that mean? What do I care about? Being your consciousness is levels of what you care about, right? So there has to be a higher level of caring and a different perspective shift on what we care about, not just ourselves. And I believe, my personal belief is that the universe is organized in such a way that you actually can't scale unless you're integrated because entropy will take over at some point, right? And so trauma, if you think about it through physics lens, trauma is entropy in the nervous system. And purpose and integration is sort of anti-entropic, which is, if you think about it, putting a little bit of energy into something that's organized and with a big output is fundamentally against the design of the universe. Because the universe is designed for chaos and disorder. So if you create order and structure, and you can create a small input with a big output, you've sort of like hacked physics in a way, right? But that has to happen in the body also, not just in the culture in the system. And every culture of every company that's being created is being created by the nervous systems of the people who found it. So if you think about ChatGPT, well, that's sort of a projection of the founders' nervous systems and beliefs. Same thing with Claude or Grok or whatever it might be. And so there has to be a consciousness rise in the creators that will then downflow into the products and into the culture. And what will happen if that doesn't happen is entropy will win, basically. And that just I think the laws of the universe are very compassionate in that way.
I love when you said that consciousness through the lens of what it is that we care about. Earlier, you said that for someone to truly step onto this journey of nervous system regulation or healing, whatever you want to call it, they have to hit that moment of enough with the way that I've been doing it. And I think that one of the pathways where that really happens is where someone starts to ask themselves, well, what do I really care about? And it's easy, I think, especially at a young age, to outsource like success and achievement as these kind of altars that we can worship at. And if I achieve that thing, everything will work itself out. And then we get older and realize that it doesn't happen. And so, as we start to elevate our own consciousness, figure out, well, what really does matter to me? And it's like, sure, I'd like to create success and have financial freedom, but also I'd just like to feel good in my body. I'd like to have relationships that feel whole and where I feel truly known. And those are as important, at least, as the other ones, right? And then we start to realize that I can't achieve all of those with a dysregulated nervous system.
And by the way, if you just think about the basics of what you just said, I can create, okay, the universe tends towards disorder in physics. We know that, okay? So what you just said is there's more than creating external order at the expense of internal chaos. I want to have internal order with external order, right? That requires what is energy? The capacity to do work, right? That requires energy directed internally. So I have less entropy on the inside, right? And that's why I'm so fascinated by Elon's take on this father work, because it's like, yo, bro, you're basically creating so much entropy in yourself that your system could be more efficient if you were able to actually have more integration on the inside, right? And so what you just said makes so much sense because we want to have an anti-entropic force or an anti-chaos force or more structure internally and externally, right? In everything that we do, because that creates more what's called harmony, right? And that's what we ultimately want, is that goal of harmony. So that's what's fascinating to me about some of these exponential thinkers is they're thinking in physics externally, but they're not aware of their own physics.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Neville Goddard?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, he has a great line. I love this one. He says, everyone is doing what they're doing because of how they think it will make them feel.
Yeah.
And I love that idea. It just makes me think about, again, this idea of external contribution, internal harmony. It's just a very simplistic way to frame it, which is like, of course, I would want both of those things. And so I love that idea, though, of anything we tell ourselves that we want, whether it is the relationship of our dreams or a certain amount of money in the bank, that there's an unconscious association of how we'll feel once we've attained that. And once we're actually clear on that, it oftentimes provides a map of like, oh, well, if I'm not there, there's some work, there's some path that emerges of like, okay, well, what's in the way, right? How do we actually get there?
Right. I'll piggyback off that. So this idea of flow state is very popular now, right? So Michele Csikszentmihalyi is the person who created this concept of flow. One of the core elements of flow state is that the process must be what's called autotelic, which means the process is as enjoyable, if not more enjoyable, than the outcome. The only way that's possible is if I have internal congruence, right? And yes, entrepreneurship is hard. Elon is famous for saying that, hey, you know what? If you want to start a business, you have to be really good at tolerating pain, right? Because you're kind of like staring into the void, which is true. But what if entrepreneurship could be autotelic? Meaning, what if the process could be as enjoyable as the outcome? That's another level. And that requires a consciousness change. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I'm deeply, deeply fascinated with this nexus and the idea of, I think that sometimes what gets lost in that articulation of like, what if the whole process can be enjoyable and autotelic and rewarding, is just to remember that some of the deepest challenges are hard, but also really rewarding as well. Of like that we can stretch ourselves, we can work really hard because we love something and it's really meaningful, and stretch ourselves, and not because it's coming from a place of lack or scarcity or needing to, but because we are inspired, because it's stretching us in ways that are meaningful or contributing. And so it's just that lens of, when, for listeners to contextualize that further, which is, it doesn't mean that it's just easy all the time. Like autotelic, it's like that the process itself is enjoyable and meaningful. It can be deeply stretchy, but there's just, again, that context where it's all matters in ways that we've defined for ourselves, which is cool.
Can I find joy in the fact that the pain of growing this business is a privilege in the first place because life is alive? Like, the fact that life is alive is so incomprehensible, right?
Totally.
Like that's a higher level of caring than previous, a higher level of consciousness than previous. Does that make sense? Right. So
Yeah.
it's a privilege to feel the pain to grow something. Wow.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
100%. Sure do. So if someone is, let's say, like, even on this podcast, and they're kind of waking up and they're curious of like, well, yeah, that sounds nice, I'd like to do that. What are some of the most helpful modalities to start looking inward and transforming some of these patterned ways of being and regulating the nervous system?
Well, I'm biased. I created a whole modality called functional coaching, which is that's basically what we've been talking about this entire time is what functional coaching is. And I have a book on that I've written, Claim Your Power, Reclaim Your Nervous System. It really depends on what your goal is. I think that number one, you have to be around people who have achieved the result that you want. That's super important, right? And then also, it's important that you are understanding how your system works, right? So, like, if you think about your body and your nervous system as a vehicle, when you get into a car, you know what the steering wheel does, what the brake does, what the accelerator does, like all that type of stuff, right? And so we have to understand how your body works. There's lots of ways to do that. We have products and programs for that. That's one of the things I love about internal family systems or somatic experiencing and these different modalities also, or my friend Scott Lyons runs the Embody Lab. They have a lot of awareness around, and we have programs and products as well around the same thing, which is like basically building what's called interoceptive skills. Interoception is paying attention to what's happening inside myself, right? Thoughts, feelings, physical sensations, and getting to know your reactions, which are automatic, and what you want to create. All of that, all those processes are very important. If it's super painful, the most legal way to get in touch with your inner states and change them is ketamine assisted therapy. I'm a big fan of ketamine assisted therapy. I also like ketamine because it's like kind of like the workers psychedelic, where like, you do like MDMA or ayahuasca or something like that. You're on this like multi-hour, super long journey where like ketamine is like in, out, done 45 minutes to an hour. And you're just like on to the next thing. And it produces 3 to 4 days of neuroplasticity in the brain too. But that has to be done hopefully in the right context with a good scene and setting, with a guide, and that can kind of open up things. I'm also love, there's a technology called the Stellate, Stellate, stellate ganglion block,
Fuck, yeah.
nerve block in the neck. And there's a company called Stella, Stella, that's doing this nationally now. And the stellate ganglion is where all the stress nerves come up and down your body, basically. When you do, it's a 15-minute procedure. They inject an analgesic into your stellate ganglion on the left and right side, which is basically lidocaine or something like that. And it stops the stress data from going up and down. And it's kind of like a reset, basically. I've seen incredible, powerful state changes. And this has been researched for years by the VA for PTSD and stuff like that. But now it's being seen for just anxiety and other issues. And certainly for entrepreneurs, we get stuck in these hypervigilant states of stress, 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 stress. So the stellate ganglion block is this very powerful. I don't really believe in nervous system resets because it's kind of a gimmick, but it's literally a nervous system reset because
Yeah.
it's ultrasound guided into the nerve cluster, and it literally just like cuts the signal. So it's like literally a reset. So those can be some very powerful tools for people to explore. And the field that's emerging, that's doing these like rapid state changes in the body, it's called interventional psychiatry. right? So it looks like ketamine assisted therapy, stellate ganglion blocks, a TMS therapy for the brain, stuff like that. And there's a lot of different things that people can do. But what's cool is we're starting to realize is that most of the mental illness or the problems that we're having are just there's a biology to them. And if we can impact the biology to change quickly, then we can get, you can make it better for the lifestyle to change also. But it's also, again, the stellate ganglion block, the ketamine, whatever, the Ozempic, whatever, it's not going to do the work for you. It's just going to help you get to do the work in an easier way and get you out of a certain state for a period of time, but you still have to do the work.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I really appreciate about your work as well is how pragmatic it is about the actions that also correspond with nervous system regulation outside of just the introspection and rewiring some of these patterned ways of being internally. And so when you talk about doing the work, can you say a little more about what are those pragmatic processes and kind of actions that are required in our life to maintain a regulated nervous system outside of just doing some of the intrapersonal work?
So first of all, the regulated nervous system does not mean you're calm. So calm and regulated are not synonymous in this context. A regulated nervous system means you can experience hard emotion and come back to baseline faster. So if you think about, I mean, Tom Brady, one of my favorite athletes, he's in NFL till he's 45, right? When he didn't train to be calm. He trained to be able to take a hit without being taken out. That's what a regulated nervous system is, right? Is we have to learn how to take a hit without being taken out, which means I experience panic, grief, sadness, depression, etc., but I can come back to baseline in 30 minutes instead of 30 years, right? So that is ultimately what a regulated nervous system is about. It's about being able to come back to baseline faster. It is not why I'm never triggered. Like if you don't want to be triggered, why are you don't start a business, that's for sure. Don't have
Totally.
kids, you know what I mean? Like, don't eat anything that tastes good, right? Like, it's never gonna happen, right? It's more about improving your relationship with those triggers, and everyone has unique triggers or things that stop them on their growth path, so the more that you can get to know those, the better, and then whatever behavior that's stopping you, that's the behavior that's kind of like your upper capacity, and so you wanna ask yourself when you're going through something that's like, causing you to kind of quote unquote self-sabotage, ask yourself the question, "Wait a minute, right before this, what was there something good that was trying to come through? Hold on a second. Before this argument, before this, binge, before this whatever, was something good trying to come through? Was something beautiful trying to come through? Usually the answer is yes. And then what you recognize is this behavior is sort of like a thermostatic setting that's keeping you stuck in this sort of certain frame and you want to increase the capacity for positive emotion to allow that to come through and to be able to consciously decide, you know what, I don't want to do that self-limiting behavior anymore for this level. I want to expand to the next level and increase my capacity for positive emotion, increase my capacity to let something good come through and to recognize that a lot of these behaviors that I thought were bad were actually just these responses keeping me safe from uncertainty, but the uncertainty that's kind of trying to come through is actually something positive most of the time. Does that make sense?
It's an incredibly helpful definition and beautifully said. So I really appreciate that you started from that place. That a regulated nervous system is not about being calm all the time. It's about how quickly you come back to baseline.
That's right. That's exactly
Yeah.
right.
And so let's move into what are some of the things that you really encourage people to do like in this practice of, I was really drawn to when you talk about the importance of agreements with ourselves and how big that is and around self-trust and how to develop that quality and capacity. Could you say a little more about that aspect of your work?
Yeah. So I think ultimately what is integrity? That's a loaded word in personal development. Like, and also it's kind of a judgy word. Like you're out of integrity, right? And it's just like, so I
How
like
do
to,
you define it?
well, integrity is a sense of wholeness, basically, right? That's really what it means. I think a better word for what you're asking about though is actually congruence, right? Am I congruent with what I care about most? And I think that's a really important question to ask yourself. And whenever there's something off for long periods of time in your life, you're not being congruent with something you actually care about. And I think that's a really important thing to pause and notice and to name. And so the reason why you're not being congruent with something that you care about is because on some level you think if you're not being congruent with it, then you'll be safe. But again, something positive is trying to come through. So what this means is you want to have good communication with yourself. And that sounds kind of strange or basic, but we have the way you influence somebody is communication. Ultimately, you can communicate with your vocal, your words, your facial expression, your tone, your language, but how good are you at influencing yourself, right? So it's important to be able to know what influences you, what drives you, and how you communicate to yourself. Because basically, if I had to make it really simple, we all have an inner critic that's like kind of a jerk to us, right? You can tell how good you're doing in your personal development or healing by how kind that voice is to you, right? If you have a loving, caring, nurturing, encouraging inner critic, you're winning. If you have a voice inside that's like just taking you to town, beating the shit out of you, right? Maybe there's some work there, right? And the goal is to be able to communicate better to yourself and to get aligned with the things you care about most and link that up with your survival to recognize actually this is the best survival response to be linked up with what I value most. And that includes keeping promises to yourself and being congruent with who you really are. Because when we're non congruent, that's where stress and dysfunction and dysregulation and these states become traits over time and become personality and identity over time. And so ultimately, if you want to change your identity, you want to change your level of consciousness or what you care about yourself, how you communicate to yourself, the agreements that you keep to yourself, and keep agreements that are aligned with what you care about most, which could have big impacts in your life, by the way, in terms of relationship changes, job or work changes, career changes. But can I have a little bit of trust as I make those changes? Yeah, something might be a relationship might die or something might die, but something better is trying to work its way through. Something positive is trying to work its way through, not this is going to be shit forever.
Yeah, totally. And you talked a lot about identity and, even in there, we're talking about self-trust. I'm curious, how does one start to articulate that clear, authentic self, if you would, like in this process of like, well, who am I that needs to be expressed or where do I want to communicate from? And in your kind of system of growth and development, what are the most constructive ways to do that?
I'm going to keep it really simple. Okay. The good news is that ultimately your identity is your behavior, not your past, not what you think about yourself, not the voice in your head. It's what you do. You can have all kinds of negative thoughts or traumas from your past or whatever. None of that is who you are. Ultimately, who you are is what you do. And all the things we've talked about today, Andrew, boiled down to improving your behavior ultimately. That's ultimately the goal. And human beings, by the way, are the only animal that allows words to change the meaning of behavior. I don't know if you've ever done equine therapy, but if you get close to a horse and you get stressed out, you can't say to the horse, you know what, when I was 5 years old, this happened and this is why I'm stressed out. Like you can't contextualize it. You get freaked out, the horse gets freaked out, right? So ultimately, what we want is we want behavior change. And your identity ultimately is your behaviors and your actions. You will be defined by your actions. And to me, that's the best news ever. Because if I was defined by what happened to me, my past behavior, any of that type of stuff, I think I would be really down on myself. But I know that who I am is what I choose to do now. And so ultimately, everything that we're talking about is boils down to what do I want my behavior to say about who I am? Not my words, not my Instagram content, not my brand. All those things are emergent properties of who you decide to be now.
So let me push on this one a little bit. So if what we're doing right now defines the self, then how does the stuff that we've done in the past not have any sort of application or association with like the identity or who we are? Because it mattered when right through that lens. I'm curious because I think that when I look at it, I find that a lot of times, myself included, I feel that we neglect a lot of the good things that we have done as we're naturally focused on the things that we fucked up or didn't
Yes.
do that we wish we had done. But
Yes.
there's also a lot of things that ways that we've grown or things that we've achieved, things that we've created. And so sometimes there can be a lot of value in looking at both, but also just looking at all of those actions I would agree with you. I think one of the most accurate articulations of who you are, but it's just whatever you're doing right now and whatever you do afterwards is the only part of it that you have any sway over.
And
So,
afterwards will be now. You know what I mean? So there,
yeah, totally.
right? So it's always now. What you just said is so important. So I have an iPhone. Most people I know have an iPhone. The software in the iPhone updates regularly, right? Sometimes I'm happy about it. Sometimes I'm not happy about it. Whatever. Same thing with like the apps I use, right? Being able to stop and internalize things you did well is a critical internal software update that I recommend people do regularly because most people are experts in what they get wrong and they are not aware of what they get right. And it's very important to internalize your wins. And that is a software update, right? So to stop and say, you know what? Yes, I will always be on some level dissatisfied because I'll never be at the next level because when I get to the next level, it's the level I'm at. And now that I'm there, I can see more. So I'm always going to have dissatisfaction, but I can pause every time I level up and go, hold on a second. Let me take a moment to take stock and actually look at how far I've come. That also updates your identity. Does that make
Because you're
sense?
doing it. Yeah, you're doing it right now.
That's right.
Very much so. Yeah.
So we update our phone software. We should definitely update our internal model of the world and our own self identity, and include not just the bad, but include look at all the good that you've done also. And that's really hard for people. I think one of the hardest things for most people to do is to tolerate positive emotions about themselves.
And what do you think the reason for that is?
Evolution. It's not. It's like it's not evolutionarily valuable to walk around all day just feeling really happy because something's going to get.
Totally. And you had talked about in the last thing you were saying about how communication is ultimately the way that we impact and influence others. And I'm curious about when I think of nervous system regulation, so much of this happens in the realm of the emotions. And as we start to become aware of the emotions, especially those that are more challenging, sadness, shame, anger, what are the ways that people can start to translate this new awareness and connection with our internal world into communication that is constructive and connecting us with the people that we'd like to connect with?
Totally. So I think one is what is your posturing towards yourself around the things it's hard to feel? So my recommendation is to befriend it, which is like curious. Hello, what's this sadness about? What's this grief about? What's this anger about? Tell me more. How old do you think I am? And also to stop trying to change that part of you. A lot of people, we do parts work, whatever, and we try to get in touch with the part and then give it new information and say, no, but it wasn't that way. It's this way now. Stop. Your lungs are your lungs. They have a purpose. You don't want your lungs to be a kidney. You would die, right? So the part of you that's protecting you, the part of you that's holding trauma, that's its job. You do not want to change its job. What you want to do is you want to put it in the passenger seat and come from that wise adult or regulated self or soul self or life force energy or whatever you want to call it now and let that part off the hook for and just say, I got you instead of trying to get it to change. Bad idea to try to change parts of you. It's a very bad idea. Then, once you have a befriending stance towards yourself and you're not sort of your own enemy, if you will, being able to go to the people in your life and calmly at the right time, not during an argument, not when you're hangry, not when you're trying to fall asleep or when you're in a good moment, say, hey, you know what? I learned this about myself. Actually, this behavior comes from when I was this old and this happens. And ultimately, what I really need in that situation is I need you to say, hey, honey, you're doing a great job right now because that's what I never got back then. And if you can start to recruit some of the people in your life to give you that nutrition, very powerful. And also, if you can be that person for the people you care about, also very powerful. Because then we don't have to get into so many arguments and all these different things. It's just like, oh, you actually need to be right now because you were gaslit when you were younger. So do you feel like I'm gaslighting you right now? Even if I'm not, that's not the question. I go, oh, sorry about that. You know what? What's what am I missing about what's right for you in this moment? Right? Like it's a little bit of a different stance towards some of these reactions. And if we can communicate that with ourselves better and then get and recruit other people to understand why we're doing certain things when we're reactive and we can understand why they're reactive, we can create these shortcuts in our communication to be able to just be more efficient and not have to have so many fights or whatever it might be and be able to actually know each other better. Not just know ourselves better, but know each other better also. And what's challenging usually in a relationship is the thing that your partner needs is the one thing you don't want to give them.
What do you mean there?
Like most people, everyone I know who's ever gotten into a relationship somehow finds the person that the one thing they need from you is the one thing that's the hardest for you to give, right? So it's like some, I don't know, universal joke or something like that. And it's crazy, but it's just like, wait a minute, if we're actually on the same team here, the hardest thing that's the thing that's hardest for me to give in this relationship will be healing for me to give to you because I'll be giving to myself also. And that's a very powerful reframe. And so most relational problems can kind of get boiled down to that right there, basically.
I have a great relationship therapist, a guy named Jordan Marks in LA. He
But
just
yeah,
actually released you know, Jordan? Yeah.
yeah,
He had a book come out this week. It's called Till Ego Death Do Us Part. And yeah, he calls it the dance, but that idea of like, you'll find the person who activates the unhealed trauma in you, which is the brilliance of the unconscious, that it wants that trauma to be felt so that it can be healed. And I loved, again, it's just a reframing of like, oh, it's painful and also of deep service, the brilliance of the unconscious, that like I will find the thing that triggers that unhealed part of myself so that I have the opportunity to look at it and hopefully heal it. So
exactly
yeah.
right. And healing it would be learning to give that thing to myself and my partner and vice versa.
Yeah. And can you say more? Because I love that framing there about the importance of giving the thing that you need to the other.
Yeah. Well, I
What is
mean,
that? Yeah.
Tony Robbins, says this. It's not mine, but relationships are a place we go to give, not take. Now, that being said, I would say a relationship is a place you go to give to yourself and the other. And receiving and taking are not the same thing. Giving and receiving are opposite ends of the same phenomenon. Taking is neither giving nor receiving, it's just taking. So, the goal basically in a relationship is if you're going to a relationship to get your needs met, that's motivation. That's not relational, actually. Relationship is what is this person's model of the world? What do they care about? And let me give that to them, not at my own expense. So I'm going to take care of myself and give you what you need. And if two people can come to that agreement, you have a really awesome experience. Most people, because of what you just said, go into a relationship and they're in the very beginning because of all the chemicals that are there and oxytocin and dopamine, serotonin, all the things. Like the person becomes the perfect redeemer of the thing I never got. Oh my God, they're gonna finally be this perfect thing. And then ha ha ha, 6, 12, 9, 18 months later, now all of a sudden the person you love most is like devil spawn. How'd that happen? Right. And it's because now the goal is I am starting to do this work. I'm starting to realize actually the thing that triggers me the most about them is what I'm not giving to myself. And I have to give it to myself and give it to them and vice versa. And that's a very mature process. It takes two to tango in that way. But ultimately, if you get two givers, and not, I don't want to give you what I think you need. No, I need to give you what you need. Right? If you just think about this, right? If you've ever been in an argument and someone says, you know what, I'm really angry. And you're like, oh, what I heard you say was you're really upset. You'll make them more angry because one word difference, right? No, I'm not upset. I'm angry, right? What I heard you say was you're angry. So now I'm outside my model and I'm in their model. The problem is most people think if I give to the other person or if I get outside myself, I'll be at a loss or I'll lose out or I won't get my needs met. And that's your own self abandonment showing up, basically. And so we want to approach relationship from a place of being generous to ourselves and the other person. We want to become an expert at what we need and we want to give it to ourselves. We want to become an expert at what they need and give it to them, have them become an expert at what they need to give it to themselves, and have them become an expert at what we need to give it to us. And if we can kind of have that dance, we can have very successful, productive relationships.
I love that. And I'll keep this path going on in the realm of relationships here. And I'd love to hear a little more about your thoughts on the importance of regulation as a leadership skill and tactic, and the importance of leading from that place. And we've talked about it tangentially earlier about Elon and some other things, but I'd be really curious for people who are in a position of leading, whether that's managing a team or running a business. What would you say are some of the biggest reasons that someone should prioritize developing this skill and some of the biggest benefits?
Sure. So if you study emotion, the whole point of emotion, besides uh, reactions in the body, emotions are basically appraisals of what something means, and they're very fast. Okay. And what happens when you get a group together, could be a team, could be a tribe, could be a community, right? There's a phenomenon called emotional contagion. And emotional contagion is emotions spread kind of like a virus, right? And so what that means is that I get reactive to something. I produce an emotion in my body that says, "Oh my God, that means this." And then you see it, and then that produces that in you through mirror neurons. And then another person, another person. Next thing you know, you have a whole culture of people who are in a certain emotional state because that's what this means. And so that's what culture is in a company. That's what culture is in a relationship. And so you want to basically ask yourself what culture, what state will benefit this team the most to produce the outcome that we're going for. And then as a leader, you go first and you take 100% responsibility for creating that state in yourself. And then that will start to outpicture and start to catch basically with everybody else. But if you're expecting your team to go first, you're not leading, you're following. And you want to take 100% responsibility for your state. I don't care about money, the environment, what happened to you when you're leading, when you have goals, when you have accountability, when you have something on the line. None of that shit matters. What matters is what you do with it. And you have to take 100% responsibility for your state and to recognize that you're in a position of leadership, which means you're kind of the caretaker of this situation, this organization, this team. And they are feeding off of your not just words, your state. And so they will catch your state one way or the other. And so if you take 100% responsibility for your culture as a leader, that will shift and change because emotions are supposed to be spread. And if you're in a leadership position, there's a power dynamic. Your emotional state will spread differently than the people who are subordinate to you, or reporting to you, or underneath you, or not in charge and not in ownership, right, of the company. And so, if you recognize that the burden is on you to have that state that's required, it doesn't mean that you're always happy. By the way, you can have a high standard, right? But you want to hold yourself to that same standard. And I think we've been bagging on Elon a little bit, but this is also where he thrives is he holds himself to such a high standard. That guy will sleep on the floor painfully with the engineers to figure some stuff out, right? And I think that's why people flock to him so much too, because he's willing to do the small stuff as well and take 100% ownership over the small things and the big things. And so you want to be responsible for that and recognize you are responsible for that. And whatever state you create will eventually make its way into the culture because emotions are caught like a virus, basically. So it's like, what virus do I want my culture to have, basically? Because
Yeah.
look at yourself, that'll be the virus.
Yeah. That I did a podcast recently with Rand Stagen from Stagen Leadership, and he just says it's like, you will leak, and that at the end of the day, the culture comes down to the CEO. Always, it just starts there.
And there's a,
Uh,
there's a neurobiology of why that is. It's not
totally.
random. There's a reason
Yeah.
why.
And even just thinking about other benefits, there's this great Dale Carnegie quote from back in the day, and he said, "People need information to understand; they need emotion to decide."
Yes,
And so, whether you're fundraising with VCs or just went through a retrenchment and need to convince your employees that everything is okay, it's like you
that's
can
right.
have the right words, but at the end of the day, they're going to pick up on how you feel because
That's
they
right.
will feel the same way.
And
Yeah,
that gets back to what we were talking about earlier with like self congruence, right? If you're
totally.
people will always scan for congruence. Always, they'll feel it from you, one way
There
or
was
the other.
a congruence is an interesting way to think about it. I had a friend who was a really good friend in New York. And I remember we went to the Banya and he had just come from, I think it was Union Square Ventures. And he gets into the Banya and he's like, yeah. I was like, how'd it go? He's like, not great. And he was really bummed. And I was like, what happened? And he's like, well, they said no. And I was like, you're going to get told no a lot, like raising a bunch of cash. So that's not that big a deal. But he said he asked the VC, can you tell me why? Like, why are you saying no? And he said, when I'm looking at companies, I'm really looking for two things. Like, number one, it just needs to be a good business. And number two, I'm looking for what feels like the aura of inevitability. And it's just a feeling that people have, an aura of inevitability. And I love that idea of, again, it's like it is so much more of a feeling than it is like just the information that's in a pitch deck.
That's exactly right.
So
And that's an emotional context that that person's looking for.
yeah. And again, I love your distinction of just what is a nervous system and what is not. It's not feeling calm all the time. It's that ability to come back to baseline. There's, very few things I think that will have the chaos and the stresses being in a high level like leadership position or a startup. And so that ability to take whatever's happening and come back to baseline is so valuable. I love that you described it that way.
That's right. I mean, people fail in business because they give up. They give up because of their state. Like nobody goes bankrupt. You choose bankruptcy. You know what I'm saying? Like to me, failure is just choosing to stop. And that's a state decision. That's a state driven decision. The people who persist, because we all are going to come up against contraction. We're all going to come up against chaos. Chaos tends to come before the breakthrough. I wish it was the other way around, but that just seems to be the universal pattern. So the people who thrive are the ones who choose to not give up in those moments. And because of the state that they're in, that allows them to have that choice, basically. And so I've had suicidal ideation in my life. I've had my businesses almost destroyed multiple times through my own efforts, through the efforts of others, through outside forces. I've had so much chaos in my career. And most people would never know that because I don't want to hang my flag by that and be like, this is look at all this hard stuff I've been through. But it's the decision to not give up. And that comes from the state that you're in and how aware you are of yourself and how you communicate to yourself and what does this mean. And I think the people who last are the masters of meaning to themselves and others ultimately. And also, what does something mean? Well, when are you making that decision? If you make the decision about what something means in the moment, it'll probably be a shitty decision. Some of us, we prejudge things too soon. We prejudge situations, we prejudge circumstances, we prejudge people too soon. We don't have enough life experience or enough skin in the game or enough time yet to say, I for sure know what it means. And at the end of the day, for me, it always just means this is data.
Yeah. And who are the people? One of the things I love doing on the show is allowing the teachers to talk about who their teachers were. And so when you think about this type of nervous system work specifically, who are the people that have been most influential on your work? But I guess where I'm more curious is actually on your own nervous system. Who are the people who,
Yeah.
and maybe I'll ask a different question first, actually, which is just, how's your nervous system doing now?
I mean, my nervous system is coming out of like 5 years of confusion, I think. 2020, 2025 was a lot of confusion for lots of different reasons in terms of the things I just spoke about relationship change, business changes, COVID, like a lot of different things. And then also like my consciousness expanded and I'm like, I want to do more than what I'm doing. And what does that mean? So there's been a lot of sort of confusion. Right now, I feel very alive and focused. But if you ask me this question last year, the year before, not so great, more confusion, more uncertainty. And now I feel very alive and very focused and directional in what I'm building, which is also why I'm doing podcasts now because I wasn't ready before.
Beautiful. And what would you say, who are some of the mentors along your path who helped you to navigate challenging things like that, confusion, and maintain a regulated nervous system throughout that? Or did you have a regulated nervous system
No,
throughout some of
definitely
those?
not. I mean, no, I earned it. And also, like the next level for me, I'll have to earn that too, because the next level for everyone is just as hard as the last level. So, but Tony Robbins for sure has been a major impact on my life. I would say a woman named Ellen Bader, ELYNBADER, at the Couples Institute. She's an incredible therapist. She's been an incredible influence in my life. My friend, Dr. Scott Lyons, who runs the Embody Lab, has been a dear friend. He's not I guess you could say we learn from each other. I wouldn't call him a mentor, much as a peer, but we talk a lot and supports me a lot. I would say certainly my belief in a higher power. I would consider myself to be a Christian mystic, meaning the words of Jesus and the life of Jesus are pretty solid. I'm not an evangelical Christian in that context. And also I'm not a religious person, more mystical practice. So the belief that, uh, the belief in grace or that something new is coming through and that the idea of redemption, the idea of surrender, the idea of being of service has been really big. I have a cross tattooed on my arm It says love. That to me is sort of the message. So my faith in Jesus in that context is very powerful for me. My friend and coach Adam Cobb has been very powerful in helping me break through.
Love Adam.
Yeah, he's just incredible. So those are some of the people that really come to mind in terms of the people that are like in that sort of position. And also, actually, you know what, Bea actually in that way, she's really called me higher in many ways. So I think, yeah, those are definitely some people. Oh, and Stan Tatkin. Stan Tatkin's work has been very powerful for me also in understanding myself and others. And then
And
also, oh
I
yeah,
know him as he's a psychologist or a therapist.
he's a couples therapist. Yeah. And then also, I would just major shout out to ketamine.
Big shout out to ketamine. And you've talked about it before. Like I'll share about even my own experience. I had never experienced it until several years ago. And I had always written it off as somewhat of like a party drug and the experiences that I had seen it utilized most. And as someone who has a really profound and I would say healthy relationship with psychedelics, I was so surprised to end up having one of the most profound and intense psychedelic experiences of my entire life. And so it's like you said, play with caution and in assisted context is like advised there, but it really is a powerful substance. And it's really a cool time to see some of the stuff proliferating. And you had talked about the stellate ganglion block, and I'm even having friends now who I'm fortunate to be friends with one of the women who's leading the Beyond Center with Iboga. And there's a lot of powerful things happening with,
Yes.
I'm not actually 100% certain on Iboga versus Ibogaine, but it's about to be legalized in Texas apparently, and a lot of people going to Mexico and legal like retreats there, coming back with some of the most profound transformations. Like truly some of the most mystical, unexplainable healing I've ever witnessed as a human. I think it's, people who have been fully addicted multiple times a day, heroin users coming out of an experience like that, never once wanting to touch heroin for the rest of their life. Like not even,
Yeah.
it's,
Oh yeah.
it's just absolutely miraculous. So
Yeah. I
very
mean,
cool things
like,
there.
think
Yeah.
about it. Like most psychedelics are just plants that come from Earth that like are here for us to help us. And I will just say one thing. I love psychedelics, but again, for me, it's like a psychedelic is the same thing as whey protein. If you're trying to train and get stronger, the whey protein is not the same thing as lifting the weights. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
totally.
So,
Yeah.
so the integration is so huge on that stuff. But yes, plus one everything you just said.
Yeah. I love there's that meme of like the shadow coming out of the cave and the guy's walking out of the cave and the shadow's like, integrate me. And he's like, I think I need another ceremony. It's like, which always makes me think of it. Well, as we get towards a close here, but I just want to open it up for you. It's, for people who are listening to this, and is there anything else that you would really want them to know about the importance of or pathway into deeper states of nervous system regulation, how that's going to set them up for their next? Like, what would you want those people to know? Just some final words for you.
Yeah. So this is might sound a little strange, but I think when you look at what is the net result of, let's say I do my somatic work, I do my trauma work, I'm even doing some personal development, some healing, some growing, some visioning, I'm building, right? The ultimate result actually is your system, the electrical system in your body turns on and it's not disturbed by constriction or constriction or response or reactivity. And what that's called is life force energy. It could be called chi, it could be called kundalini, but we have an electrical system that's trying to trying to be free flowing in our body. And when we, open up what's tense, when we do the befriending of our nervous system, when we get into a better state, we reduce inflammation. The net result of that is we get this electrical current that kind of flows in our body, and it's called life force energy. And if you've never experienced it, it sounds very strange and kind of woo woo, but there's a natural sense of flow and well being that starts to emerge. And I think that's the beautiful result of doing all this incredible work. I've had so many clients that will come to me and they'll have this life force experience. And then all of a sudden they're like, wait a minute, I can create from a place of joy. I can create from a place of, and it's not like forcing it to think about joy or some type of thing. It's like just a natural flowing state. And so I think the beautiful thing is no matter what you've been through, that state of well-being and life force energy free flowing in your body is absolutely available and possible for you. And I wish that for you. And to me, I've tried to orient my entire life around now what helps me optimize that life force electrical flow, whether it's NAD, it could be vibration work, it could be fascial work, it could be certain food choices, relationship choices. But you get into a place where there's a better day to day lived experience. That's ultimately the goal, I think, of a lot of this work is to really activate your life force energy and have the felt sense of this very much alive electrical pulse in the body that ATP fuels it and stuff like that. There's a bunch of mechanisms in the body that make it possible. But I think that ultimately knowing that if I knew that was the goal previously, I'd be like, sign me up. I want to go faster. Like, why am I doing all this work? And so to me, that's a really beautiful sort of thing that I've really been considering in terms of what's next for my mission and my message, because I really want people to have that experience.
Well, and I'd be remiss not to frame some of our conversation. We're recording this on Christmas Eve,
That's
and
right.
so we're headed into the time of year. You called it the dark days of everyone's kind of turning off, but also what everyone is doing is getting clear about what happened in the year behind them and telling themselves what it is that they're going to do in the year ahead. And we started our conversation by I shared your quote, right? It's that no change happens until like the system feels as though that change is safe. So what would you say is the correlation to people who, and I'll try and release this actually like right before or after New Year's. What would you say is the correlation for people who are doing some really intentional planning of, hey, here's how I want to be different. Here's what I want to achieve in the year ahead. And how can they look inwards at their nervous system and what they can do to support that external change or impact by looking internal and being intentional about what they're doing with their system?
Okay. I'm answering your question, but it's probably not the way you want. My challenge to people who are reflecting on what they're working on and wanting to shift something is to actually notice, where have I been stuck? Where have I been struggling alone with a problem? And how can I ask for help with something I've been struggling alone with? And who would be the best person to ask for help from who's producing the outcome? I think it's important to go internal, but I think what causes a lot of pain for people is, and yes, you got people around you and friends and family around you, but there are certain things that we struggle with alone, even if people are around us. And I would challenge you and the people listening to, as you're reflecting, to go, okay, there's this one area where I'm stuck. If I'm really honest, I've been holding this by myself. I've been trying to figure it out on my own. How can I let people around me know that like I need help in this area? And to create a shared context around something you've been alone with would be very powerful.
I love that. And I couldn't agree more. I think 2 years ago, one of the things that I was struggling the most with was just phone addiction. And so I started in January, I came back and I started the break up with the phone group. And then without marketing, I posted on Instagram once and we had 600 people in the group who all wanted to do it because and it's this idea. And I was like, well, shit, now I really got to stop looking at my phone all day. But it was so helpful. But I really do love that advice. Yeah, to bring people into that journey with you if it really matters. Yeah. So powerful, man. Well, Mastin, thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks so much for your commitment here. You talked about some coaches who are here today, gone tomorrow. And even I loved when you said in the beginning, hey, I talk fast when I get excited, but your enthusiasm for the work is really, it's deeply felt. And so it's awesome to see you stepping into some new chapters here that you're feeling clear and excited about. And I'm sure that a lot of people are going to benefit from it. And I'm really grateful that we got to talk a little bit more today and look forward to staying connected and hopefully seeing you in person sometime soon.
Andrew, thank you for having me, man. Fully received and reciprocated. Thank you so much.
Yeah, brother. Have a great Christmas.